when you speak. I now welcome Mr. Christopher Howe and Ms. Jayne Newgreen. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees have been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Christopher Glenn David Howe. I'm a civilian and I'm here to represent myself and my partner Jayne Newgreen.
My name is Jayne Newgreen. I'm representing myself and my partner Christopher Howe.
Thank you. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask questions. Over to you.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Howe and I thank the committee for the opportunity today. I trust the Senate committee has reviewed and considered my submission being number 91 and that of my partner Jayne Newgreen being number 92. Toxic, bioaccumulative, endocrine disrupting, persistent, carcinogenic forever chemicals and the new asbestos are just some of the terms used by scientists and health professionals to describe PFAS. I sit before you today with clinically proven extremely elevated levels of PFAS chemicals in my blood and most likely my organs. I'm a civilian who has never served in the Australian Defence Force, worked as a firefighter, nor used AFFF firefighting foams. From mid-2021 until late September 2022, I was employed full-time by a third-party private company operating from a small facility located at Avalon Airport in Victoria, east of Geelong. The building we occupied was subleased from an ASX-listed parent company which, to my understanding, holds a long-term lease on the premises from the Commonwealth Government of Australia via the Australian Defence Force. In November of 2022, 5 weeks after voluntarily resigning from that role, I was alerted that the drinking water supply to that facility was contaminated with PFAS. This contamination was also widely reported in the media. Through participating in the University of Queensland study led by Professor Jochen Mueller in December 2022, I received test results which proved I have significantly elevated PFAS contamination in my blood of up to 15 times the average for my demographic. In February 2023, I received independent lab test results that showed that the water I was drinking daily whilst employed at Avalon Airport was contaminated with PFOS and PFHXS almost 200 times the National Health and Medical Research Council 2018 guidelines for safe drinking water. If the proposed new NHMRC PFAS guidelines are adopted, then the water I was drinking will be 3,000 times the level permitted. At no prior stage was I ever made aware of PFAS contamination at Avalon Airport. I now understand it's likely that Avalon Airport Management, Air Services Australia, the Department of Defence and the Commonwealth Government of Australia were all aware in 2018, if not earlier, of PFAS contamination at Avalon Airport through the historical use of AFFF firefighting products over many decades. It is reasonable to conclude that this known PFAS contamination posed a significant risk of infiltrating the groundwater on site and in turn breaching the original ageing 1950s asbestos cement drinking water supply pipes. However, none of those entities acted to stop me being poisoned. It is also reasonable to expect that knowledge of PFAS contamination on site and the subsequent magnified risk of drinking water contamination be communicated to all parties involved and potentially affected. If that had occurred, all my issues regarding PFAS could have easily been avoided. This did not occur. Over the past 3 years, I've repeatedly questioned those entities regarding PFAS contamination at Avalon, and the responses, if provided, have been depressingly underwhelming. After much research, I have voluntarily embarked on a program of plasma donation inspired by the amazing work conducted by Mick Tisbury of Fire Rescue Victoria and Professor Jochen Mueller and his team at University of Queensland, amongst others, who I wish to personally thank for all of their work. Over time, I am reducing my blood PFAS contamination levels. However, it is likely to take many more years, most likely decades, before my blood levels return to average. The PFAS levels in my organs remains unknown, all the while the time bomb ticks. In addition to my recommendations in my submission, my further recommendations to the committee is answering the following. Who are the entities responsible for PFAS contamination at Avalon Airport? Why are they not being held accountable? Who will hold these entities to account? And why aren't these entities being held culpable for the negligent harm caused by their inaction, despite them knowing about the PFAS contamination at Avalon? I hope my evidence highlights the frustration of living with PFAS contamination and the fight to hold those responsible accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Newgreen.
My name is Jayne Newgreen. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. You'll have received my written submission, number 92. From that, you will know about the extreme PFAS levels in Christopher's body and the impact that this has had on our lives. Today, I want to speak plainly and personally because this is not just about PFAS contamination of land, it's about the human cost of inaction. My partner Christopher didn't work for firefighting with firefighting foams. He didn't work for Defence, Air Services or as a firefighter. He's an everyday civilian who simply went to work, like millions of Australians do every day. But the land he worked on was contaminated with PFAS. This was known to the landowners, but no one told him. For around 15 months, Christopher drank the water at work, water which he believed was safe, water which we now know was contaminated with PFAS, likely from contaminated land and groundwater and compromised water pipe infrastructure. No one warned him, no one stopped it, but the Commonwealth knew about the contamination as far back as 2018, possibly before. How did they know? Because it is Commonwealth land. Yet nothing was done to stop that poison entering Christopher's body. Let me be clear here. We believe that this is chemical poisoning. A man-made, persistent, toxic substance now circulates within Christopher's blood. We know it is there. What we don't know is how much damage it will cause to his body, his organs, his endocrine system, his immune system, and to our future. Christopher was poisoned at work while working on Commonwealth land, but no one is taking responsibility and no one is being held accountable. Our inquiries have led us down the garden path and back again. WorkSafe Victoria accepted Christopher's claim for anxiety, a mental injury, a direct result of the PFAS poisoning, but they rejected his claim for a physical injury. Again, Christopher has PFAS, a man-made chemical, in his body at an alarming high rate as a direct result of going to work. I ask you, how can this be considered anything but a physical injury, a workplace injury? We're not the only ones to wonder this. At a recent Workplace Injury Commission conciliation hearing, referring to the rejected claim, the conciliator told Christopher, to be honest, this is the fault of the Act, and unfortunately, you've fallen through the cracks. Let that sink in. Poisoned at work, on Commonwealth land, and no safety net in place to stop Christopher falling through the cracks. One small win for which we're extremely grateful is that Christopher was accepted into the Queensland University study on PFAS exposure. This has enabled us to be informed, to monitor Christopher's blood PFAS levels and other health markers. It has made us feel less alone and in greater control of lowering not only his blood PFAS levels, but also his anxiety around having this crap in his blood. Outside of that study, we're alone. There is no public health support, no peer support, no union, no roadmap. We do it all ourselves. I'd like to say how proud I am of Christopher. He's done the research. He's taken it upon himself to implement a self-imposed regime of health monitoring and plasma donating. It's not easy. It takes physical and mental toll, but it's the only known option to reduce his PFAS levels and try to mitigate future risk. And for his efforts, I'm extremely grateful. Still, while we do what we can to reduce the risks, we live with fear. Every unusual symptom or pathology test within that medical monitoring sets off alarm bells, and the same question comes up. Is this because of the PFAS? Could it be cancer? But the deepest wounds aren't always physical, they're emotional. The grief, the anger, the frustration, and sheer exhaustion of trying to fix a problem we did not create. And so I ask you, why is this our sole responsibility to fix? We didn't even know about the PFAS contamination. We weren't given that option. So we didn't ignore the contamination. We didn't ignore the risk. Christopher just went to work. The Commonwealth knew, and they let this happen. The risk ought to have been removed before Christopher was ever exposed. Or at the very least, he should have been informed of the risk to make his own decision. And I can assure you, what we're dealing with now was not worth those 15 months of work at Avalon. Christopher is a casualty of an avoidable regulatory failure. To this day, the government tells people not to test for PFAS, that testing isn't helpful. But I can assure you, our lived experience proves otherwise. Testing has given us clarity. It has allowed us to take action, and it has provided us with hope. Without testing, we would still be in the dark. So I ask this committee to do what others have not. Acknowledge the Commonwealth's role and responsibility in all of this, and to act. I urge you to adopt the following recommendations. Funded PFAS testing for all exposed individuals. Medical treatment pathways without limitations. Mandatory public disclosure of all known PFAS contamination sites. Make the Commonwealth answerable to the EPA laws like any other entity, and recognise PFAS poisoning as a physical injury under WorkSafe and government systems. We can't undo the past, but PFAS is not in our past. It is in Christopher's body now, and it will be for years to come. I hope this can kicking ends with this committee. This is a burden we can't carry alone. It's time for the Commonwealth to take responsibility, and I ask this committee to please help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Newgreen. Time for questions now, so I'll hand over to Senator Davey.
Thank you both for appearing today and for your submissions, and really appreciate the honesty that you've presented with us today. A few questions from your introductions. Mr. Howe, you mentioned plasma donation as something that is assisting you to bring down your PFAS levels. Mm-hmm. I'm a plasma donor, so I'm fascinated. Can you talk us through that? How does that help? Does your plasma go into the normal donation stream, or is it sort of quarantined? Like, where's the PFAS? Is it in your plasma? I'm fascinated.
So you'll probably get a lot more information from the expert Mick Tisbury later today. So basically, PFAS love fats and they love proteins. So they hook onto fats and proteins in your blood and your plasma, which is why your body can't get rid of them, because it doesn't. They're man-made chemicals. Your body doesn't know what they are, so your liver can't process them. So it just recycles them, which is why they're persistent. So basically, donating blood or donating plasma is a way of diluting, if you say, an amount out of your current blood, which then your body replaces. As long as you've been removed from the exposure of PFAS, which I was when I left work, then you're basically replacing that amount that's been taken out each time. Now, as far as it entering the blood system, that's a question for Lifeblood. Yep. Their policy is that they don't screen for PFAS, and I think it would be impossible for them to test for PFAS. Yeah. And my understanding with plasma donation is that plasma is actually homogenised, whilst blood is kept as a single unit. Yeah. And I think their attitude is basically that if someone's had a car accident and they're in the ambulance and the offer is you're either going to die or you're going to have a quarter of blood that may contain PFAS,
Yeah.
I know what my answer would be. Plus that 450 mils of blood is 1/15 approximately of the body's. So the issue with this is that it doesn't destroy the PFAS. The PFAS is just pervasive. It just goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
And isn't dealt with.
And we are hearing that all along the way. You mentioned that being part of the study has given you at least some knowledge and understanding, and that you don't feel alone, because one of the things we've heard in this whole inquiry is from people who have been exposed, contaminated, the communications is really bad. We often hear that they feel alone. They're not getting that. They're not getting the information. So when it was discovered that the drinking water at Avalon was contaminated, how were you alerted? Because I understand you'd already ceased work.
Yes. So it's my understanding that Air Services Australia were alerted on the 11th of October 2023. Avalon Airport Management didn't alert my previous employer until the 2nd of November of 2023. And in the first week of November, I was having a casual, non-work related conversation with an ex-colleague. And that ex-colleague said, "How about the PFAS contamination at Avalon?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "They haven't told you."
So you found out effectively media and reports and word of mouth.
Vicariously.
No.
My
formal-
ex-employer didn't even see fit to pass on that information to me, even though of all the people employed at Avalon, I was there for the longest period of time and the greatest exposed.
I can see why you're frustrated and angry. You have every right to be angry, because this is an exposure that you would think there is an obligation on employers.
A duty of care.
A duty of care. Because I know through past employment, I've received letters years after the fact saying, you may have been exposed to asbestos. So that happens. There are processes in place. Clearly, it's not happening for PFAS. Thank you. Ms. Newgreen, you spoke about in your submission as well the mental health tolls of this. Do you think better communication, better assistance would relieve some of that anxiety? I mean, it wouldn't clearly...
Yes, I do. It's very difficult to read international studies that are telling us that this is carcinogenic and go to the government health website and be told, don't worry, it's nothing to worry about. We don't know, there's nothing proven, because that only causes confusion. We don't believe it. There are greater studies internationally that say this is not good. We don't want this in the body. In fact, the Australian government says to avoid PFAS in the body, and yet there are no regulations to actually have disclosure on where the PFAS is. So how are the public supposed to protect themselves? It's all the mixed messaging. It's telling us not to get tested. I'm sorry, but if you're trying to hide information from us about our own health, yeah, that makes us distrusting of what we're reading, and it causes anxiety. So I understand that there are a lot of other people affected on this Avalon site. We don't know them, we're not connected and associated. I hope that others have their own peer support or unions or people around them that are supporting each other. We're very much alone because there's no structure to help people who are in a similar boat to us.
If I may quickly add to that
Yeah.
too. I find it incongruous that the national health message on PFAS from Australia is that it's not harmful, and yet the Australian Defence Force paid $157 million to people downstream of air bases at Oakey and Williamtown and Katherine, and those people were told they couldn't sell their livestock or their fruit and vegetables. You can't have both. It's either harmful or it's not. Otherwise, you've just gone and wasted $150 million of taxpayers' money paying for something that you're claiming is not unhealthy.
That's a really good
It's crazy.
Thank you. I wonder if Senator Pratt, can you hear us, Senator Pratt?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I ask, please, about, thank you very much for your evidence today. Can I ask, please, how you are supported? Are you getting support just through this study? I think that's what is disclosed.
So I think the question was, we're getting support only through the University of Queensland study. Is that... apart from my GP and my psychologist, then essentially yes.
And I might ask this by the Chair, what exposure we've had as a committee to that study and how long it's going to run for, and what its findings actually, when they're due to be released.
So
Do we have that evidence as a committee?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Senator Pratt, we're having it's very hard to hear you. Clarity's not great here, so if you don't mind just speaking into the phone, we'll try and turn you up on this end.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Chair.
Please. Could you ask that question
Yes,
again?
I think that, I guess my question was, and our witness was going to answer, but Chair, I really just wanted to ensure that we're following up that study as a committee.
Okay. Yep, sure. Did you have any further questions?
Sorry, Chair, did you just ask if I had further questions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, if PFAS contamination at airports is fairly common, are you able to give us advice around why this loophole in Commonwealth compensation exists? Is it simply because ComCover doesn't recognise PFAS contamination in general terms, or is there something wrong more specifically with occupational health and safety law more broadly?
Thanks for your question. For clarity, Avalon Airport, in my understanding, is on Commonwealth government lands. The only recourse I have for compensation or WorkSafe is through the Victorian WorkSafe Commission, which is a state-based organisation. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with how it works in Victoria, but basically there's WorkSafe Victoria and then there's an insurer and your employer, and it's the insurer's remit as to whether they accept or reject your claim, and they have rejected my claim of PFAS contamination. That is the actual molecules which are currently circulating in my blood. They reject that constitutes a physical injury, and their wording, so they accept that I've been exposed to PFAS chemicals due to my employment and do not dispute I have elevated levels of PFAS as a result. They claim, quote, I did not sustain an injury within the meaning of the Act. And that my PFAS exposure has, quote, not yet given rise to an injury as defined by the legislation. So because I don't have cancer, I'm not injured, is their reckoning. And I believe that their interpretation of Section 39 of the Victorian WorkCover Act is incorrect, and that my PFAS contamination can be described as nothing but a physical injury as defined by the Act.
Thank you. can I ask, are there different outcomes in different states for injuries like yours?
I'm not in a position to answer that question, as I've not researched it.
That's fine. It's something for us to find out the extent to which the Worksafe Act, which is national, and the state acts, which are supposed to be compliant with that, where the problem is. There's clearly precedent with firefighters where some states have introduced injury laws. I'm unclear the extent to which those kinds of laws might apply to people who have similar levels of contamination. Is that something you're aware of?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
If I may...
thank you. Yes.
We are aware of what happened at Fiskville in Victoria and a presumptive law or something around PFAS contamination to firefighters, but again, it seems that Christopher falls through the crack as he is not a firefighter, so is not considered, despite the fact that he's been highly exposed. And with regards to, it was hard to hear your question, but with regards to Commonwealth or Commonwealth-owned land and airports, my point 4 of my recommendations in my opening was to make the Commonwealth answerable to Environmental Protection Agency laws, the same as the state. So our understanding is, despite the fact that this contamination is on Avalon land in Australia, because it is on Commonwealth land, the Victorian EPA have absolutely zero jurisdiction to do anything about that contamination, despite the fact that firefighters, Air Services Australia personnel and civilians such as Christopher are actively and daily working on that land.
Last question,
Okay.
Senator Pratt.
So one of the things that you would clearly want to see is consistency that's applied at that high threshold across all exposures, regardless of how they've occurred.
And regardless of which land they occurred on, because it seems that Avalon Airport Management get away with a lot of things because they're on Commonwealth land and are therefore not under the jurisdiction of local Victorian laws.
Thank you, yeah, I think that's probably the case for a whole range of, there's certainly cases in Western Australia where people neighbouring airports have elevated levels of PFAS quite similarly. So I'm trying to unpack the kinds of exposures that people have and that jurisdictional responsibility. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. I have a few questions before we end this session. So, have you approached Avalon Airport or Air Services, the Department of Defence or WorkSafe Victoria about your blood tests and associated impacts? And have they provided any information on how to manage this to you or provided any supports?
How long have you got? Yes, I've contacted Avalon Airport Management. I requested all of the water testing results from the building that I was in and to be provided any further information as it came to light. That would have been in 2023. They told me that this was a WorkSafe issue between me and my employer, and they have since refused to respond to any of my emails. I did have a conversation with a representative around that same time, who's told me that Avalon Airport Australia did not do any water testing on site and all of it was conducted by Barwon Water. I contacted Barwon Water. They refuted that claim and said they have no jurisdiction on private or Commonwealth land and that they only tested until the boundary, which was their remit, and proved that the water supply to the boundary was clean of PFAS, not clean, but within acceptable levels, proving that the contamination happened on site. I've contacted Air Services Australia numerous times. Most of those contacts were ignored. Once I did finally get a reply and they basically sent me their press pack and links to their website. I contacted the Department of Defence multiple times. I eventually got to speak to Nelma Akund, who is the Director of PFAS Policy, Governance and Communications federally on the 1st of the 8th of 24. We had a very circular conversation. Her claim was that there's currently an investigation underway into PFAS exposure at Avalon and that a report would be tabled. When I asked, she couldn't tell me who was doing the report, what the terms of the report were, when the report would be tabled, or whether that report would be public. And as far as WorkSafe Victoria, yes, I put in a WorkSafe claim. As discussed before, they've accepted that I have a mental injury and not a physical injury, and that they rejected my claim. My claim for the mental injury is still there. I've never claimed a cent out of WorkSafe Victoria. That's not what I'm interested in. WorkSafe claim is putting a line in the sand where it accepts that I've been exposed, and I have potentially have some protection in the future if I get sick and have to rely upon my family to look after me and incur costs due to the fact that I was contaminated at work. That's my intention with that. I've also sent letters to the Honourable Catherine King, who's the Minister responsible for Air Services Australia, and also Richard Miles, and who's also the local member for Avalon, and took months to get responses from them, but their responses were kind of grossly inadequate. The Defence, Richard Miles put me onto the Veteran Affairs Department, which I'm not quite sure because I'm not a veteran, and Catherine King basically refused that there was any, it was ongoing. It's really frustrating. You do not get answers out of any of this, and they all those entities say it's the other one's fault, and so we just go around in this circle.
Thank you. And if there is any further information you can provide on notice, if you weren't, because of the time restraints that we do have, please feel free to provide anything on notice to us, which will still form part of the inquiry. Do you think there should be nationwide efforts to target PFAS affected populations with blood or plasma donation schemes?
Definitely. Considering the fact that that's pretty much the only treatment we currently have for reducing PFAS levels, I think that's very important. And Lifeblood does a wonderful job, but they only have so many resources in so many places, and so many, I think, people affected by PFAS in Australia are in regional areas where it's very difficult to get to those services. I travel an hour round trip to do it. I think the more important thing, it needs to be done in conjunction with blood testing and free blood testing so that people know what their levels are and can see a benefit of that over time, and so therefore see that change and consider the value of donating plasma regularly. But the most important thing is you need to remove them from the exposure. There is no point donating plasma if you keep drinking water that's contaminated with PFAS.
Do you think WorkSafe should be coordinating a blood testing program for affected workers, no matter how they got exposed?
I think that some government entities should be, whether WorkSafe is the correct one, I'm not sure, but I think that should be mandatory. If you are exposed to PFAS, you should be able to go and get your blood tested for free.
Yep. A couple of more questions. How could a blood testing program for exposed workers be managed to protect their mental health and allow for any negative future diagnoses?
I think that just comes down to communication and education. Is it better the devil you know? I certainly appreciate the fact that I knew what my levels were because, whilst there's still, mental health issues associated with the fact that that you have an extremely elevated risk of cancer and all the other elements that are attributed to PFAS exposure. The benefit is that then sets a benchmark, along with the fact that I've removed myself from further exposure, being Avalon Airport. then that gives me a benchmark to work against. And I have a spreadsheet of donations over time, and I can see the benefits. You know, I know that every time I go and donate plasma, that's 5% less PFAS in my body. And that's a graph approaching an asymptote. It's always going to be there, but that's what drives me to do it, because it's a measure, and that makes me feel positive, that I'm actually having a positive effect, and I'm changing this. I can control this. I'm still have elevated levels as I sit in front of you today, 3 years later, and there's still the increased risk of cancer, you know, and even when I get back to zero, I'm still going to have that risk because I'm sitting here now with PFAS. It's never going to go away. And I'd also like to make the point that the only way we have of measuring PFAS, to my understanding, in the human body is by measuring blood. But PFAS is pervasive. It goes into your blood organs. A recent University of Queensland study proved that it can cross the blood-brain barrier. So even if you reduce it in your blood, that's no guarantee that you reduced it in your liver or your heart or your kidneys or your prostate or your brain or whatever. You reduce that to zero and you still have PFAS in your body.
Thank you.
Chair, can I speak to that? I do think Christopher has taken it upon himself, and we also have the means to realise that it got to the point where his mental health was suffering, and he took it upon himself to seek counselling, and that has helped. But the frustrations in doing that alone, he spent the first 4 sessions counselling the counsellor, providing him links, providing him information. The counsellor did not understand PFAS. So yes, to answer your question, whether it's through WorkSafe or another means, for people who have proven high PFAS, or whether it's before the testing or after, to be able to be provided with free mental health care and counselling ongoing, this problem's not going away, with a counsellor that understands this issue. Because it's very trying when Christopher is either trying to help himself through mental health counselling with a psychologist, spending time explaining what the problem is and why he's so anxious about it in the first place.
Yeah. Thank you. And while I have you, in your submission, you state your partner carries some level of guilt associated with ridding his body of PFAS through blood plasma donations, and questions if it is ethical to just pass this PFAS on to someone else's body. Has Lifeblood been informed of his elevated levels, and has it been considered to dispose of the blood instead of it being given to someone else?
Lifeblood have information on their website that they accept PFAS contaminated blood. Christopher has casually mentioned to the nurses why he's doing it. Some nurses have no idea about PFAS, and others were acutely aware of what was going on because they see so many fireys in there donating blood too. To be honest, you know, this was a heated argument in our household last week. Christopher did not want me to bring up Lifeblood. He did not want to risk the only avenue that he has to get the PFAS out of his body by accusing Lifeblood of anything, when at the moment it's his only option. He does not want them to, on the form that he has to fill out, where he has to say that he's feeling well, there's that he hasn't been overseas, etc., etc. He does not want to see a day where there is a tick box that says, do you have known high PFAS levels or PFAS in your blood, and tick that box and no longer be able to donate through that system. There are therapeutic plasma exchange health treatments. This happens in Melbourne, in, I believe, the Alfred. People with cancer and other bone marrow cancer or something, I'm not sure exactly, use that system. My understanding is it is exactly the same process that Christopher goes through of extracting the plasma, but it is for therapeutic reasons. My belief is that Christopher should be able to donate without the limitations of the Lifeblood system. It's an anxiety that he has about that opportunity being taken away. And yes, it's an anxiety around somewhat knowing that the PFAS that he knows about is not stopped at that source, that it is actually going on to other people and circulating within the ecology.
Thank you. Thank you both for appearing today. Thank you for your evidence.